Good evening, Nibley 12th Ward. Brother Nuttall here again. This month we're going to be talking about food storage. Um, just as a little side note, when I was looking through this subject and this topic, there wasn't a whole lot of specifics, like I would say. Mostly kind of guidelines from people, and some guidelines from the church as well. And really, the important part is to find something that's going to work for you and your family. So, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of specifics for you this time, but I do have a couple of quotes here. Well, one quote in the story I want to tell you about. So, in a 1988 letter from the first presidency to priesthood leaders, this is back when President Benson was president of the church, he said, "We encourage you to follow this counsel with the assurance that a people prepared through obedience to the commandments of God need not fear." And he was talking specifically about food storage at that point. And when I was looking through this, found out that food storage actually started back with Brigham Young. And I think we understand that they all had the bishop's storehouse that they could donate to for tithing, and that would go out to people in need. But I didn't realize that had been something that President Young had talked about doing for individual members clear back in that day. So food storage is actually pretty darn important for a lot of reasons. One reason in particular, before I was born, I had heard this story from my parents before, but I called my dad today to ask him about this, and he said back, man, I don't know, I think when they had 3 or 4 kids. They ended up having 8. I was number 7. They said that they actually lived off of their food storage for about 6 months because my dad had changed jobs, and it just so happened that it was, I think, some type of job where you got paid on commission. So really, they just didn't have a lot of income coming in and had to rely a lot on their food storage, and they would supplement that with, fresh vegetables and stuff from the grocery store. But here's what I learned while researching this topic from a couple different sources. First thing, this came from one source just online that I found about preparation and food storage. They talked about 3 to 4 different types of food storage that you should have. The first one that they talked about was having food storage for a 72-hour kit. Something like power bars, MREs, something that's really quick and easy to eat on the go. The purpose of those 72-hour kits is so that we can leave quickly if necessary and have, obviously, supplies to last us for 72 hours. And we may not have the ability to cook, so it needs to be something that's ready to go. The next thing that they talked about was having a 2-week supply of food, which in my mind, as I was reading about it, sounded more like what you would have in your pantry or your freezer, something that can last you for a certain amount of time. Meals that your family will eat, nothing necessarily that's probably like freeze dried or anything like that, but definitely stuff that you may have canned yourself or bought from the store. The next one they talked about was a 90-day supply, and I added in long term to this because this is what I feel a 90-day supply is. It would be something more long term. That's going to go into your freeze dried food, your number 10 canned food, things like that. A couple considerations though when looking at something like this. Actually, let's talk about different types of storage. This also came from a few different websites. They said there's a couple ways that you can basically store food, and one of them was being from your garden. Your garden can be kind of a storage place as long as it's time to harvest, but they also talked about taking that food that you grow there, canning it, freeze drying it, whatever it is, to store it away. A different type that I think a lot of us, it takes a little more effort, but that would be menu planning. We buy what you already eat, something that your kids would like, especially us with young kids that may have picky eaters. It's important to be able to give them something that they'll actually eat. We can give them whatever freeze dried or kind of gross thing we want, and it may not be suitable for them because they just may not eat it. So menu planning is going to be kind of rotating through those foods that you get on a regular basis. The next one was long term, and we already talked about that a little bit. Raw ingredients. I remember my parents had just buckets and buckets and buckets of raw wheat, and we had a grinder. If you're able to do that and make food out of raw material, good for you. I'm not. I can't do that. I'm not smart enough or motivated enough to do that. So let's go to a couple considerations. And we already touched on this a little bit, but what can your family eat? Are there dietary restrictions due to like allergies or just sensitive stomachs, we need to take that into consideration, especially when we're looking at long-term food storages. How can we cook it? Hopefully you still have power and water and all that stuff when you have to use your food storage. But we need to understand that it may not be available, and we need to have ways to actually prepare and cook the food. Again, my parents had a wheat grinder that was electric powered by an electric motor or a hand crank. I, being young, my mom had me hand crank it sometimes, I think, just to use up some of my energy. How and where can we store our food storage? To me, I have started doing freeze-dried foods just because it is simple and easy for me. We just don't have a lot of storage space for stuff like that. But I do have places where I can put those buckets and they just stay there, easily stored, and they last for 25 years. On that note, we need to know the shelf life and rotate our food if necessary. I was talking to a guy at work that he actually buys cows, and his plan is to buy these butchered cows and to cook and can them and then cycle through them every 3 years. He knows the expiration dates. He knows it's going to take a lot of work, and that's something he wants to do. We can do that with any food, especially if you're gardening and canning your own. Okay, so this was actually kind of an interesting one. Talking to my dad again, we talked about some of the difficulties with food storage. You may need to store vitamins as well. For vitamin supplements with dietary issues or restrictions, you may need to just have supplements to give you more of those vitamins that you may be lacking in your diet. As I was looking, there's no real definitive answer on a shelf life for vitamins. Most people have the consensus of 2 years, which is about the most you'll get. Again, I think it's going to be up to the individual vitamin or supplement that you're going to take. Okay, so again, that's about all I had for today. Just some interesting little tidbits. The best advice I can give is to figure out what works best for you and your family. If you are a master gardener, I think that's a great source. If you're like me and just don't have that ability or the space, we go with freeze-dried foods. And we don't really necessarily will rotate through our foods that we would eat on a regular basis. But if anybody has any questions, reach out to me. Hope this finds everybody well and healthy during this fun little time where everybody's getting sick. Have a good one.